It's my pleasure to be here with Rabbi Yehuda Sarna, who is the executive director of the Bronfman Center at NYU, one of the most important campuses in North American Jewish life. And we have something in common in that we both come from modern Orthodox backgrounds and ordination. In your case, Yeshiva University, and mine Chovevei Torah. And yet we both work in the pluralistic sphere, the broader life. So how did you make that decision? How did you make the decision that you are a modern Orthodox Jew, and yet you work in the broader pluralistic sphere? What does that mean to you?
You know, I always felt committed to the broader Jewish community. I grew up in Montreal and had a few very formative experiences, even as a high school student. I would say in my high school years, one of the most important moments was when I joined a high school activist retreat, and it was organized by high school students for high school students, which was a very bold thing. And there were about 120 high school students who were on this Jewish retreat, and only about 5 or 6 Orthodox students. And my family was a little wary of me going. I was 15 years old, but it proved to be one of the most inspiring things, because I found myself arguing a lot with people, but when I came back from the weekend, I realized that I'd spent so much time proving to my mind why other people were wrong, without really ever having dug deeper as to figure out why I feel like I'm right. And that weekend really inspired a lot of thinking on my part. Even as a 15-year-old, I felt like I had been challenged, and I had been opened, and I felt like I needed to respond even to myself. So I would say that the journey from that point really brought me to increased observance and in those years. And so I think I've always valued sitting down with people who are different than you. Not just to understand them, but to understand yourself.
Where do you see the big opportunity for modern Orthodoxy in the 21st century? And where do you think there are real challenges or even failures of how we're delivering today?
Well, let me take each of those at a time.
Yeah.
I think you have to think about modern Orthodoxy, the modern Orthodox community here, as a unique historical phenomena, where you have a community which, according to the Pew Report, has the highest average household income of families from any denomination or belonging, from Reform to ultra-Orthodox to just Jewish. In terms of a population, you have the highest average household income. What you also have is the highest level, on average, of higher education attainment, so multiple degrees, etc. You also have, ironically, the highest level of matching in income and education between men and women in the house among the parents. And you also have the highest levels of attachment to Israel. And even though not quite as high as the ultra-Orthodox community, you have very significant rates of literacy, Jewish literacy, virtually across the board. People are spending 12, 13 years in Jewish educational full-time frameworks. So for me, the big question is, how do you harness the power, the influence of this rarefied community, which, according to many sociologists, have achieved the sweet spot of Jewish life, have built strong Jewish institutions, overlapping, so that you have a child, for example, who will go to camp, Jewish camp, will go to synagogue, will go to yeshiva in Israel, will go to day school, and these institutions are all linking to each other, which create a holistic, rich, deep educational and spiritual environment. So the question is, what do we do with that? Okay, so if the modern Orthodox community has achieved this sweet spot, of course there's always challenges, problems, but relative to the rest of the Jewish community, relative to the rest of the United States, what are we doing with it? And I think that's the question we have to be centered on. A lot of the other things which tend to take up, the blogosphere, I think are minuscule compared to the. And I see there are some national organizations which recognize the unique endowment of the modern Orthodox community and are actively out there trying to engage the modern Orthodox community. You look at the APAC convention, out of the 18,000 people who were there this past year, what percentage of those were modern Orthodox? I wouldn't be surprised if, in fact, I would say I'm certain that the proportions are not in line with the proportion of the demographics in the United States. And APAC, I think, has done a very good job at engaging that community. You also look at who some of the main supporters of the Chabad movement are nationally. Chabad has some ideological similarities to modern Orthodoxy, but by and large, they've done a very good job at engaging the modern Orthodox community by saying, hey, look, here are some values we have in common. The things that we don't have in common are going to be kind of muted in that back and forth. And you look at some of the federations which have identified, the modern Orthodox community as a growth area, whether that's in volunteerism or whether that's in fundraising. So the broader Jewish community instinctually is coming to that population. What we don't see as much is a linkage between the kind of the bigger things that the modern Orthodox community is taking on and modern Orthodox values per se. I would say that the direction is not necessarily coming from the modern Orthodox community outward. It's kind of like open for business, and if this one comes knocking or that one comes knocking, there's going to be a response. But I think there's a great opportunity for leadership from this community to the rest.
Well, I think we're actually in a leadership crisis in a lot of ways, looking at modern Orthodoxy and looking at the next generation. And I'm sure every era says that. But what I hear you saying here is that if we have the highest income and the very significant academic access, achievement, and Jewish literacy and attachment to Israel, which is certainly also related to the income to be able to have transformative education over there as well, that this produces not what we see often in modern Orthodoxy today, which is a culture of entitlement, but a culture of responsibility to feed that back into the Jewish community and beyond. And I think that what I still hear as the discourse is that what can we take from society? What is kosher here? What's not kosher? Right? When it comes to food, when it comes to ideas, when it comes to pop culture, what can politicians produce for the Jewish community, as opposed to what can we contribute to the world, to society? To be a modern Orthodox Jew in America doesn't mean what in America is kosher for me, but what can I produce in direct society? And that we're not adequately given all those privileges, giving return to the Jewish community and beyond. One case, and whether someone is in favor of federation or not, we know that the Orthodox community, modern Orthodox certainly included, contributes very, very, very little proportionally to the federation system. So how do we change this kind of situation? How do we change this culture from just being, and as you mentioned, talking just insider baseball about, I don't want to diminish them as unimportant, but much less important than a lot of the global and national issues. If you read these blogs, you see that we're talking a lot about ritual and a lot about conversion and women's issues and this seminary and that seminary, all important, but not contributing to the broader society. So how do you think we change this?
Well, I mean, I would just take a step back because I would say that APAC, Chabad, etc., those are examples of contributions to the broader society. They, of course, make a contribution, and the question is whether those contributions are broad enough. And I think if you study, and the Pew Report did not do this, the average, I would say this, modern Orthodox families also have very high expenses. So yeah, they might be making more, but
Right.
if you look at the average cost of the day schools that they'll go to and the average number of children per household,
Right.
you'll see that those things are correlated also. My bet is if you ask people, modern Orthodox parents, why they both work or why they both felt like they had to enter the jobs, the careers, or why they made certain career decisions, they would say it's to pay for day schools, to afford the lifestyle. So in terms of expendable income, I don't know. I'm not sure. But certainly there is that possibility. Is it a crisis of leadership? I think it's a common crisis where people don't necessarily realize what they've been gifted, not just what they've been gifted, but also what they've earned. Just because you've earned something doesn't mean that you don't have to give back. But I would say that increasingly among the young non-Orthodox, I mean, I work with students. So among the students, I see things going in different directions. I do see a degree of entitlement among some people who are just very career conscious and just want to go out and do what they need to do. But then I also see people who are really thinking critically and creatively about what they can contribute.
Yeah, so how important do you think at this point the realm of ideas was? Initially, when we think of the birth of modern Orthodoxy in America, it's impossible to not think of Rav Soloveitchik, to think that it's almost that philosophy is the center of that engagement. I feel like we've lost that. I feel like there were Jewish thinkers, Rav Lichtenstein and Wurzburger, and a whole list of people but they thought about thinkers from a few hundred years ago, Kant and Hegel and Kierkegaard. But today, I mean, we don't have so many Orthodox theologians, and we don't have philosophers thinking about postmodernity and engagement with postmodern thinkers. It feels like we're still kind of engaged with ideas of the past. How important do you think it is for modern Orthodoxy in America today to be intellectually engaged with not just philosophy, the science as well, and all the other academic fields?
That's a good. What do you think?
I
detect a certain bias.
I guess you can hear my bias.
I detect a certain bias.
I mean,
there.
The way I view Torah is that we should be on the front lines of all issues. That's what it means to be a descendant of Avraham, is that you're on the front line. And so if it's ideas, we should be contributing to those ideas. If it's vulnerable populations, we should be standing with them. And my sense is that we have a little bit more of a stand back-ish, a little more of a defensive, a little more of a reactive response today of kind of slowly, critically observing and then responding rather than kind of being on front lines. Is that your observation?
Well, look, if I, not to get too philosophical here, but if an aspect of postmodernity is the contextualization of everyone's opinion and understanding where they're coming from, then the idea that you would have people coming out and prescriptively writing theology, saying here's what ought to be, here's what you ought to believe, here's what you ought to do, somehow runs counter to that. I remember when I was in college at Yeshiva University, I was taking a class in philosophy, logic, and the professor put up what he believed was a logically compelling, a logically sound argument for the existence of God. And it's the logic machinery. And he asked the class how many people who, let's say, would not have believed in God beforehand as a result of this proof would then believe in God, and no one raised their hand. I thought that was very telling, because I don't think that philosophy nowadays can have a dramatic influence on moving people. I think if you look at the scholars who study those who are successful at motivating people, at moving people, it's really about the story. And so I would say if there's anything that's missing, it's the ability to find the stories, to tell the stories that can move people to action.
Yeah, beautiful. So last question for you. We talked about engagement with other denominations and how crucial that is to not only contribute, but to refine our own sense of understanding. How about with other faiths? You were in this documentary produced by Chelsea Clinton with an imam And so there's a starting place there. How important is it that Jews are in conversation with Christians, Muslims, people of other faiths? And what do we have to gain? What do we have to contribute?
Yeah, I think by analogy, the modern Orthodox community is plays an important role, potentially can play an important role as a bridge between the liberal denominations and the growing ultra-Orthodox segment of the population. I think within America, we can play a very important role also. On the one hand, we've achieved a certain degree of success and preeminence within American society. On the other hand, we will always see ourselves as a minority, even if people will see us as being a part of the majority. And I think that gives us the ability to bridge to groups which might feel marginalized or on the outskirts or on the fringes, and also gives us the confidence to deal with people who feel like they're in the mainstream. So I think that dual positioning is very important.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So we're always outsiders in touch with those on the margins, and yet today as insiders, to some degree, how do we not lose that consciousness of being on the outside?
Yeah, and sometimes we do lose it.
Yeah, and it's very easy, yeah.
And sometimes we do lose it. So when I hear some people talking about, those immigrants, and I'm almost in disbelief, how can you, or those refugees, and I'm in disbelief, your father, your grandfather.
Right.
It is that is a challenge that we need to address. I think that's one of the big questions that's facing us.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean on that particular issue, and then sometimes they'll say they're undocumented. How many people in very different circumstances, but came with forged or fake passports? How many Jews to America? And so it's a part of who we are. And it's easy to forget.
Or tell their family story with a sense of heroism that they slipped through, they got through,
Right. So I think there is a crisis of leadership today, but also huge opportunity for what modern Orthodoxy is and can be. And I think it takes stepping out of our system to actually be a part of the broader Jewish community, broader world. 1 foot in, 1 foot out to some degree. To ensure that halakha, Jewish law, is relevant and in my view, evolving to be most relevant. And that we're addressing the big questions and opportunities of our time. So I think you're one of the few who represent that and building bridges as a modern Orthodox Jew who is doing that with different faiths, with different denominations, and working for a very, very important organization at a very important campus. So if you continue to follow Rabbi Sarna, all the wonderful things he's doing out there, and thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you.